Welcome to the AI Accelerator Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Zembrowski, founder and CEO of AI Agility, where we help organizations unlock the superhuman potential of their workforce through AI. Today, I'm fired up about this conversation because my guest has done something that very few people in the AI space can claim. He's actually built, scaled, and sold a technology company. He's not just talking about enterprise transformation. He's actually lived it across multiple decades and multiple ventures. Tom Famularo is the CEO and founder of Cap20AI and a three-time entrepreneur. Before Cap20AI, Tom founded Fast, which is a leading insurance technology platform that was acquired by Verisk. He then led Verisk's Life Solutions business, helping some of the largest insurers in the world modernize their core systems. Throughout his career, Tom has focused less on inventing technology and more on helping organizations actually adopt it. And if you've been listening to this podcast at all, you know that's exactly where the real challenge lives. That's where the change lives, and that's what I'm super passionate about as well. So, Tom, welcome to the AI Accelerator. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. So I grew up as a tech guy, and based on some of the things that we'll talk about today, you're probably going to question, does he really work in technology? Because I found out many years ago that people are at the center of the adoption of technology, and you really can't get to tech without the people involved there. As you mentioned, I started out as an entrepreneur, small company, grew it pretty significantly, sold it to Accenture in 2006. I learned a lot there about just the human behavior. And then I started Fast in 2008 because I really wanted to go into a place where we could eliminate a lot of the unnecessary work that companies would do. And actually, interestingly enough, almost 20 years ago, what we built was similar to what you see with Claude Code today. Is the whole idea was to take business people and be able to let them speak in English in their business terms and let the code get generated as it was. Had a pretty successful exit there, sold in 2019, stayed on for a few years, helped it grow significantly even more after that. But it was great to work for a company like Verisk, where I got to see how a data company who's been collecting data for 30 years, how they operate from that side of things. And it enabled me to really be able to connect everything together, which is everything that I've learned about technology and SaaS combined with data as well as AI to be able to launch what we've done with Cap20AI.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You've helped you've helped organizations adapt across a lot of these cycles, right? Like SOA and cloud and modern platforms today. And now AI is all the buzz, right? And you've seen what's working, what's not working with these different technology cycles. So let me ask you directly, what makes this new AI wave that's going on right now? What makes AI adoption fundamentally different from every other technology that we've been through?
So I've been through all those different forms of change, and I can assure you that this one is very different. So obviously it's faster, more powerful, and easier than most things that we've seen. But the other side of it is that it improves itself. So it's the first technology that's more like a living organism that is improving itself, but it also has full visibility at the CEO levels and the board levels. Unlike things like the cloud, where it was like a cloud, it was pretty amorphous, it was ambiguous to people. This is something that you'll see CEOs just doing their own thing at night, and then they come in and say, well, this is what we need to do. It obviously it's on demand. There's no barrier to entry, no infrastructure required, no long development cycles. So adoption, really the friction of it is organizational, not technology. So from a speed perspective, things are moving faster. Things that you could do used to take weeks, days, now are taking hours. And then the other aspect that makes this different is the autonomy. You're not as dependent on other people. So when you're going from into cloud, you were dependent on the cloud engineers. When you were going from mainframe, you were dependent on developers. So there's not that dependency. People could just take it on their own.
Yeah, it's very true. And you mentioned something important, like technology is moving super fast right now. Right now, it's a lot more available and accessible to anybody, any level of the organization, right? With this new AI and technology and everything that's there. And you also mentioned about how organizational and people are at the center. I totally agree with that, right? People are at the center. So if organizational and the people side of it is where the friction is, I want to unpack that a little bit more. What are your thoughts there about how we get past that human resistance, right? That's in organizations. What do we do about that?
So first, the hype cycle that people go through, and I would say everybody goes through this, which is they start using a basic Gen AI, and it's the greatest thing in the world. Look how much it could produce. And then they pretty quickly realize that they could get to 90% of the way there in no time, and then that last 10% takes forever. Or they rely on it too much and they just pass on work that's just wrong. So then they get burned by it. So then they shift from this is the greatest thing in the world to it doesn't work. And it creates this tension. Most companies in general, for every tech transformation I've been through, companies resist change, right? So they're always going, individuals, most people, they really don't want things different. If you, I got a kick out of when I was watching the show Yellowstone, right? He ran on the premise that he wants to stand against progress. And it got me thinking, why would anybody want to stand against progress? The reality is because the people that are making decisions are people in pretty good positions. They've got a good job. They make a good living. They like what they do. Why would they want anything to be different? However, the reality is the world is changing around them. So you have no choice but to adapt to be able to maintain what you have. So that tech resistance is there every single time. So it applies to pretty much everything. And there you have the usual obstacles that people throw up, compliance and legal, and somebody else that in a different group doesn't want it. And then there's too much legacy to be able to integrate within my ecosystem to actually make it work. So you've got all these things stacked up against you. There are really two simple ways. One, I would advise all of the suppliers out there, vendors, to just create things that actually add real value so that people can adopt that. And then customers, go greenfield, start over, create small working groups, small departments, so that you're not encumbered by all the legacy of people as well as technology. And then the second side of this is, for all of us, recognize it's not magic. It seems pretty close to magic and it does a lot, but realistically, AI is only going to get you so far. We still need humans in the loop there. We can't think that it's going to automate everything we do. We use this catchphrase around here all the time, which is most people don't recognize that the human and the chimp have a 98.8% overlap in DNA. That 1.2% is a big difference. So I think of AI as the 98.8%. That's the chimp. It can do almost everything. But without the human there, it's going to get it wrong. And people aren't going to be able to embrace it and adopt it because of that. So if you combine the two and do it the right way, then you can get the results and then people can adopt the technologies.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, human in the loop is so important, and you and I have both seen this in a lot of organizations. And I want to get a little bit more tactical and unpack that a little bit more. When you're working with a Fortune 500 company or a mid-sized organization, what are the top adoption challenges that you see that's out there right now? Like, I guess what's your playbook for pushing through some of those challenges that you're starting to describe?
Well, first, you're seeing companies at different levels where some are forbidding their people to use AI, which I think is absolutely insane. And then you've got others who are firing people for not using it enough. And so in reality, there's not a real good strategy there. When you think about it and this is just like all other tech transformations, it's always been driven by the tech people. So tech transformations shouldn't be driven by tech people. It should be driven by business with the tech there to support it. And unfortunately, because the history of technology has always been, you need the tech people there to be able to do it. They're the early adopters, and they get out there and they set the agenda, and then you're never going to get people aligned. So most companies don't recognize that the first thing is it's really a culture and a change management issue. It's a strategy that is, I've got to change my culture. I've got to have embrace this change. And the other problem here, especially with AI, is going to be that people are used to changing culture and change management taking years, decades. It has to be really rapid. It has to happen very quickly. Otherwise, you're not going to know what hit you. And so this is where I keep coming back to go greenfield, start over. The best thing I could have ever done was leave a large data and tech company and start over because I was completely unencumbered and we could do things so much faster. Well, you could do that same thing in a large organization, whether you're a startup or a large organization. I've worked with some of the biggest companies out there on transformation and change management, and it always comes down to, I used to have this visual. There was this, outside my old office, I would watch out the window. There was this bridge being built. And you had this river and this old decrepit bridge. Well, they didn't knock down the bridge. They built a bridge next to it, got it up and running. Then they put some traffic onto it. Once it got up and it was good, then they blew up the other bridge. Well, that's the same thing that has to happen. And I've worked with some really good companies who have taught me a lot about how to do it from the other side, from the big company side. And I've always done it from the vendor side. And partnering with those types of companies has made a difference. It can be done.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. I totally agree with you. There's so much innovation that can happen with AI and with as you're saying, sort of building. I love the bridge analogy, right? It's building a new bridge on the edge with a different team, same team, what have you, but you're building it out. You can build it out quickly now with technology. And then when you're ready, then you make the move as an organization. And I think there's I've seen a lot of this happen quickly. So one of the biggest questions that I'm hearing a lot from executives, Tom, is that, where do we even start? I find that there's a lot of companies, as you said, some are like, oh, don't use it at all, or you're going to get fired if you don't use it enough, right? There's a whole mixed bag of perspectives out there from leadership, and it definitely starts with leadership. But I feel like a lot of leadership that are out there, a lot of the folks, they want to do the right thing, but they're not sure exactly what that is. They know AI is big. They know it's going to impact their organization, their industry in a big way, their role, their career, everything. But they're sort of asking themselves the question, where do we even start? And when they get clear on that, then they can start to lead their organization in that direction. How are you seeing companies start to unpack that? Are they engaging with experts like you that are like helping them understand what that is, what their options are? How are they figuring out, what they should focus on first? How do they solve that?
Well, it is a big struggle because similar to the past, they're looking to technology to make these decisions for them. And tech people are going to be more likely to do things that are for tech's sake versus from a business perspective. When you think about it, you really just have to take a step back and rethink everything and how you approach things that you do. So just kind of give you an example of something from an implementation standpoint. I'll give you two examples. One is more implementation and the other one is more end use. So from an implementation standpoint, we think in terms of being able to take a business idea and turn it into technology. And so to give you an example of this is at many different companies and industries I've seen, you'll give somebody a product actuary or a business analyst this 50-page, 100-page document that they're going to read through, and they're going to try to figure out all of what the customer really needs. They're going to iterate for weeks trying to figure this out. Break it down. You need to be an expert in that business domain. Then you need to be an expert in what the system is going to do and how that's going to line itself up. And you break it down into like a flight plan and figure out what you need to do. 2-3 months later, you know what you need to do. And then you send it over to somebody to either configure it or develop it or whatever to get it done. Well, we look at it and say, just use the source. So the data itself, the artifact that creates that product specification or that commission contract or whatever it is, that becomes the source. So the business people work with that source document and that source information and then automatically turn that into the working software. So instead of having these big configuration processes and projects, you can eliminate all of that. On the business side of things, and I think this is kind of where the future of all software is going to be going, similar, using that same source of data, we think in terms of use cases and user stories. And I want to get rid of that because in reality, I think the future is going to be, it's outcome driven. So you think of something like Waze, which I think is a phenomenal, simple application. What do? You put your destination in. And what happens? The software figures out how to get there. You don't have humans. I wrote this blog a while ago, The Death of Visio. You don't have humans deciding what the workflow is, and each flight plan is going to be to get me from point A to point B. I put in my destination, and in real time, it's constantly updating itself. Well, that's the future of software. So if I put in my outcome that I want as a business and as an end user, I want to process a transaction. I want to take a loan. I want to create a blog. I want to do whatever I'm going to be able to do. I don't tell it all the steps. I don't predefine that. I give it the destination and let the AI guide me along the way and continuously go get the data that it needs from wherever, from data sources automatically. And if some of the data needs a user, hey, we'll ask the user for a couple questions. But you just get till you get a good enough data to be able to process the next thing, and then ultimately you get to your destination. So that's going to be how things are going to be done in the future. So then when you look at your use cases and your priorities, it's really the priorities of your business. So whatever your business priorities are, that's what you look at, and you tackle some of those discrete problems one at a time and say, how do I get this starting point data? What's my destination? So I start at point A, I end at point Z, and then you just let the software and the AI help you get there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love the Waze analogy as well, too, because I remember back in the AAA triptychs, you used to have the whole thing printed out. If you took one wrong turn or using Google Maps with a printout, you're done. You're like lost, and there's no recalculating until you got the GPS. And now with the AI and everything woven into that, it's we can lean a lot more as humans who are imperfect with our memories and with everything else, right? We can lean a lot more on technology to do that. And that makes a lot of sense. I'd love to share, our audience loves like different use cases and things. You shared a couple different ones, and I know you have a lot of background in the financial industries and so forth. What are some with AI and with some of the adoption that you're talking about, and we think about like what you just shared in my words was like leaning out processes. Like what are we trying to do? We're trying to go from A to B. How can we do it in the most effective way possible? And we as the human are not going to go in there and figure all that out. We're going to let AI do a lot of that work for us and also help guide us through that. What are some like real company examples that you've seen as far as like a use case where like an AI workflow transformation was really effective? Like, and were you able to like measure anything about that?
Yeah. So another aspect of this is when you look at what I said before about the human and the chimp and that extra piece that the human does. Most people are looking at scaling and automating mundane tasks and the lower level things that people do. And that's low hanging fruit. It's easy enough to do. People are tackling that. But in reality, it's not going to get you what you really need. And it doesn't cover that 1.2% of where we really need the humans. So we're looking at things and saying, let's scale the experts. Let's take what's in the expert's head and figure out how to automate their decision making. So no more rules engines, no more spending thousands of hours codifying things in all these different rules engines and workflow tools. And let's extract out of the human so we can scale their expertise. So an example might be in banking or in insurance, you have an underwriter who's making a decision on whether or not a case could be submitted. So rather than coming up with all these different imperfect rules of every possible scenario out there, you use AI to capture what does that chief underwriter think? How does he think? You combine it with, again, the source data, their underwriting manuals that they've written. They've got these underwriting manuals that they've written for 30 years that are pretty rock solid. You combine that data source, take the expert, can consume that in a millisecond to be able to take that big manual in and process it the way that person would think about it. So now your use case is as simple as an application is coming in from an agent, from a portal, from a piece of paper, from anywhere. That data just comes in. The process would go in such a way that it figures out, well, what data do I need to be able to make this decision? And go get me more data. So it recursively would go through getting more data until that chief underwriter has enough to be able to make that decision. And then that decision process is just automated, and now your case can get issued. That same process can work with a claim. It could work with compliance. It works pretty much with anything that has experts making decisions and source data of what that company's rules are, and as well as industry and regulations. You combine all of that together, and now you do that. So pretty much any business process that people do today, if you rethink it to the outcome, and the example I gave, what's the outcome is you want to determine the right level of risk. Well, why do I need thousands of workflows and systems and people involved to do that when I could just have this simple process, just take data, recursively augment my data till that decision can be made, and then just make that decision.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's, you brought up a lot of good points there, Tom. Number one is the more data that's involved in the decision-making, the more applicable a new AI transformation would be, right? Because if there's a lot of data, what you're talking about there is also about, number one, processing all the data without taking on that human mental capacity effort, because that takes an expert to do that. And it's mentally taxing. It tires that person out to try to process all that on their own without AI. So you mentioned that, but also I'm guessing, and this is a question for you, when you do those transformations, do you see that the quality of like the risk assessment and the quality of the approval levels and all these things, like the quality goes up? Obviously the time goes down because what you just shared shrinks the time down significantly to go from here's the information to let's make a strategic decision about it. So that time gets compressed significantly. And with all the data, with all the numbers, and I'm guessing that there's some measurements that you've seen and probably put some KPIs or some type of ROI involvement in there. So can you speak at all to that? Have you noticed like that the quality goes up significantly with this type of AI assistance through the process?
Well, you certainly get consistency, right? And that's what ends up happening traditionally with regular systems out there is you still end up with people making decisions along the way, inputting data. And no matter how much the system tries to cover everything, there are going to be some mistakes. So like we always ask people, wouldn't you rather scale that expert and the best person you have? And to your point, I've seen situations where, and operationally from a scaling perspective, where you'll see across 500 users where the top 10 people are doing 95% of the work. And I don't care whether that's an operation, back office operation, or a sales force, it's the same pattern. So when you're able to scale the expertise, and knowing the other thing is the human still exists. So we're not saying get rid of the expert. We're saying augment that expert, make them superhuman so that they can scale infinitely, but they're still there to catch any kind of flaws. So what's going to happen is while you're getting ready for this, they're validating that everything is good. So the accuracy goes up. And one of the most interesting dilemmas that I had was, what happens when the human would have made a mistake? Do we replicate their mistake? And obviously the answer is no, you don't want to replicate the mistake, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're not just turning this into a robotic process. So that's an iterative process there of getting there. So that human is still going to exist. So in the example where with 500 users, a handful of them doing all the work, even going back 5-10 years of technology, unrelated to AI, the answer to that question is not enhance the system to make it more efficient. It's to take those top 5 producing people and have them train the rest of them, because they're doing something right and the others are doing something wrong. Well, that same principle now exists, except that those experts, those best people that do it are training the data and training the models so that it can all get automated. So yes, your scaling goes up immensely, which cuts costs significantly, obviously, and it makes things way more consistent.
Very, very good. No, that's fascinating. There's so much going on, and I really appreciate the direct examples there. I want to shift for a second and talk about something that I know it's near and dear to your heart, but in the SaaS industry, there's been a lot in the news media lately. Like there's a lot going on, AI versus SaaS, and a lot of traditional SaaS data companies have been taking big hits with their stock valuations. What are your thoughts, being someone who's an expert in the industry? You know, what's happening there? How is AI reshaping the landscape? Is it the end of SaaS? What's going on?
Well, it's the end of SaaS for a lot of companies. So we're going to see who adapts. So yeah, I wrote a paper on this about 2 months ago before I ever heard the term SaaS apocalypse, and now that's all I see. Whether it's the financial institutions or the tech people, everybody's now talking about this. And to your point, if you look at a lot of the major, like the best SaaS companies, SaaS and data, and even consulting companies over the last year, smart money was betting against them a year ago. Why? Because they saw what was coming, that these technology companies are really at risk. And what are some of the things that we're seeing? First, and I've been on this side where I've scaled a very large company, it's really hard to cannibalize your own business. I remember a situation back in 2017. My board was putting pressure on me to create a model where we would get better financial results, having more recurring revenue, less services, less people dependent. And it was absolutely the right thing to do. We did it, and it was really difficult to do. And obviously what happened was our revenue flattened out for a little while we were exchanging bad revenue for good, but we flattened for a couple of years. And the same people on my board were panicking over, but our revenue's flat. I know, but the quality of the revenue was so much better. The sustainability of it, we're not as dependent on people. So we were able to make that transition, but it's hard and it's scary. If you're a large public company out there who's dominating a SaaS market where you've got the best technology 2-3 years ago, the best functions, best features, such great market share, it's really difficult to then say, all right, you know what, we're going to gut our business here. We're going to transition everybody down to a much lower cost model. It's just not something that large companies really have the appetite to do. So it's hard to cannibalize. At the same time, another trend that I'm seeing is a lot of the large companies out there, their customers of those SaaS are saying, oh, I could build this myself. I could just get some developers out there and replicate these systems with Claude code. And you know what? Their early results look great because in weeks, they're replicating 90-something% of what that functionality does. The problem is, now I'll give you a different bridge analogy. You're building 2 bridges across the river, and they're not going to come together. It's not going to work because you're building not based on understanding the real techniques for software and where the future is going. You're building these capabilities rapidly with a Claude code or something else, and it looks great, and it gives you a lot of false sense of security, but that's not there. So you're kind of seeing that happening at once. And you also have this feeling with startups that, oh, we could just get into the market and go build something. Again, impressive technology. I was able to replicate some pretty large scale SaaS companies inside of weeks. Now, it doesn't actually process the business that the customer is going to need, but it looks good, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have to get to the approach, kind of like I said before, for the technology companies who embrace the outcome-driven architecture with the approach that we were talking, taking that step back. I would encourage all tech companies to do what I've always encouraged other large companies to do with their go greenfield. Start over. Build that new bridge, yep. Bring your assets over. Your IP is really your strength of your data, your knowledge of an industry, and your people, but really you have to rethink everything. So the tech companies that are willing to cannibalize a little bit, and I see a couple of really good consulting companies out there, I won't name them, who have taken their lumps in the market. And I think they're going to emerge really well. So when you think about consulting companies, they're based on pyramids of thousands and thousands of people. Well, those thousands of people are going to be automated and not needed anymore. But you're seeing some of the consulting firms who were smart enough a few years ago, they took their lumps. Their revenue was dropping. They announced their revenue would drop as they were starting to shift into AI. I think those companies are going to thrive. We'll see from the SaaS perspective and the data companies, which ones actually took those measures a few years ago. So they're all taking their hits right now. Some are going to emerge and they're going to be stronger and better and sustainable for the next 10 years. And others, I think, are just going to die out.
That's a really, really great perspective. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm excited to take a look at your paper that you put together on that too, because it's been all over the news media. And what I found is that there's a lot of disconnect between the simplicity of the news stories that come out there versus the accurate versus the real story that like comes out in white papers like that you put together. Mm-hmm. So Tom, as we wind things down, if you could give one piece of advice to a CEO or business leader executive out there who knows they need to make some moves on AI, but they haven't really started yet or feel like they're behind, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that they need to get involved. So I think, one, you've got to find, I know companies are starting to do this, find the right change management person that's going to lead you into the future. Be hands-on with that person as the CEO, partner with that person directly, very involved in that, and almost treat that new greenfield, new operation like the most important thing for your sustainability. Unfortunately, as you know, a lot of large public companies, they're living quarter to quarter. They can't afford that. And so, unfortunately, comp structures are typically structured around that short-term win and not the long-term sustainability. So if you're building for the long-term sustainability, you're going to have to accept the fact that the short-term is going to be bumpy. Get involved, have the right change agent there to drive into the future. And it's a cultural thing, organizational thing, and a mindset, and not a technology thing. The technology is there to support us. Eventually, tech is going to be like electricity. Flip on the switch and it's there. We've got to be able to change that culture and mindset so that we can embrace that and use that.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's there's so much to be done with the greatest asset of the companies that are out there, which is the people, right? Like let's help the culture. Let's leverage the technology to do that. And Tom, this has been an incredible conversation. I really appreciate your time, your effort, your insights, all the energy that you shared and everything today. Where can people find out more about you, learn more about Cap20AI? Where can they go to learn more?
So they just go to our website at Cap20AI.
That's easy. All right. We'll make sure we include that in the show notes. And I think people can even remember that listening, even if they're driving in the car or they're zooming down some slope on their skis or mountain bike right now. Cap20AI, which is awesome. Well, that's great. Well, for everybody listening, if this conversation got you thinking about how to actually get your team trained on AI, not just talking about it, but doing it, that's exactly what we do at AI Agility. Head over to leadingaiagility.com. Find me on LinkedIn. Definitely dig in more into Tom and his background and everything he's doing at Cap20AI. Lots of great insights were shared in this conversation. And if you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every share reaches more people. That's what this is all about, helping change people's lives in a positive way with AI. And until next time, I'm Matt Zembrowski. Keep accelerating.